But welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Stanislavsky and Intimacy Book Launch webinar. My name is Joelle Ray Arp Dunham, and I'm the editor of the book. And before we get started jumping in, right now I actually teach at Kansas State University, and I teach acting, directing, consent and intimacy classes, and voice and devising classes, actually. So I was excited to do this book, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But before I really get started, first of all, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you being here, and hopefully you'll have some questions for us. And feel free to use that little question box, and we'll be able to answer those a little later. First of all, I want to go ahead and thank all the authors who are going to be discussing their contributions. Not everybody could be with us today, but we'll be able to talk through everything. And luckily, we have some of our wonderful authors here to talk about their chapters. We also have the esteemed leaders of Stanislavsky Studies, Stefan Aquilina and Jonathan Pitches, who are going to be talking about that a little bit, and the editor of the Stanislavsky and series, Paul Fryer. So right now, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Stefan and let him go ahead and start and say a few words. Please go ahead, Stefan.
Thank you, Joelle. I have the book here. Received it a couple of weeks ago. I still have to get really into it, and I'm looking forward to do that in the next few weeks. As you said, I'm the editor-in-chief of the Stanislavsky Studies Journal. This is one of the main outputs which the Stanislavsky Research Center produces in collaboration with the University of Leeds and the University of Malta. Then Jonathan will be speaking a little bit more about the work of the Stanislavsky Research Center. But basically, as you can imagine, with a journal that is called Stanislavsky Studies, the journal has Stanislavsky at its core. But then we also publish related material that makes the journal quite broad in what it covers. So, for instance, apart from Stanislavsky per se as a historical figure, for instance, we also publish material about practitioners who have worked with Stanislavsky, like his students, for instance, or even his immediate context. We are also interested in cultural interpretations of Stanislavsky outside of Russia. And we are especially interested in contemporary applications of Stanislavsky today. And when I say contemporary applications, I'm referring to in performance, but also as training and in the studio and in the context of workshops. So every issue definitely has one or two essays that are write-ups of these practical attempts of interpreting active analysis, for example, of workshops in active analysis or some other element of the system. We are also interested, and we have published about links between Stanislavsky and other fields, like, for example, music and music training, or anthropology, or linguistics, or neuroscience. So although the journal has Stanislavsky at its core, we are very much interested in a broader contemporary legacy, so to speak. If I were to open the journal, the last issue of the journal, this is November 2023, we have an essay from Poland, another essay from Canada, from the Czech Republic, from Greece, two essays from the US, and one from Ireland. So as you can see, we have quite also an international reach. And this is something which really makes me quite proud and happy with the journal, because it is part of the work that we do to internationalize, so to speak, Stanislavsky's scholarship. Just some very brief logistics. So we operate on a rolling submission process, which basically means that there are no fixed deadlines for anybody who might want to submit an essay. Essays are published online first. Once they go through the peer review process, all essays are reviewed by two anonymous reviewers. And once it is published online, then the essay is published in print. And we have two issues every year, two print issues every year. And we are looking always at May and November publications, print publications. Basically, that is it. I would invite you, I will leave my email in the chat. I would invite you to come to send me an email, to contact me if you have any idea which you feel would be relevant to the journal. I would be very much looking forward to discuss any possible idea. So I just leave my email in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want me to come in, Joel?
Yes, please, Jonathan. Sorry.
No, not at all. Not at all. I didn't want to dive in unnecessarily, but it's delightful to join you all. My name is Jonathan Pitches. I'm Professor of Theatre and Performance at the University of Leeds and head of school there. More interestingly, I'm the Deputy Director of the Stanislavsky Research Centre. I've just put the link into the chat, but I think it might have only landed with hosts and panelists. So if it's possible to send it out to all the attendees. Along with Paul and Stefan, this is a international research centre, has been co-hosted by Leeds and Malta since 2019, before it was at Rose Bruford, and has a long and esteemed history, going right back, of course, to Jean Benedetti's work and collection. I won't take you through everything that we do, but just invite you to visit our website and perhaps respond to some of the exciting calls. At the moment, there's a call out for Stanislavsky in actor training for the screen, another call out for Stanislavsky in America. These are two separate events coming up very soon. Of course, it's the space for the S Word as well, our annual conference, which is happening in Australia this year. I'm very, very lucky to be going there to do the keynote on Stanislavsky and mountains, believe it or not. And I won't elongate the conversation trying to explain that one here. And in essence, we're a incredibly, I think, open and forward-thinking space to work through the complexities of Stanislavsky research, and this webinar is an absolute personification of that, or embodiment of it. Thanks ever so much. Very much looking forward to hearing what's to be said about Stanislavsky and intimacy. My Stanislavsky and race arrived yesterday, but I'm waiting for intimacy, which I think is coming tomorrow. So very badly timed.
Wonderful. I just got all of them as well, so I'm excited to read through everything. Definitely. Paul, would you like to jump in, please?
Thank you, Joelle. Thank you very much. I was going to say, I nearly did it again. I nearly said good evening, everyone, without remembering that it isn't evening where you may be. So hello, everyone. My name is Paul Fryer. As Joelle said, I am the series editor for the book series Stanislavsky And first of all, I'd like to congratulate Joelle and her authors on the publication of Stanislavsky and Intimacy. I can honestly say, I've got a copy of it here as well, of course. I can honestly say that it is a unique contribution to the scholarship, and we're very proud of it. So thank you all for a really wonderful collection of essays. The book is a really good example of exactly what this series is set out to achieve. We're published by Routledge, Taylor and Francis, and we launched the series 2 years ago with the first two titles. The first one was Pedagogy, which was edited by Stefan, and the other was Race, and both of those titles appeared earlier last year. And we've got 3 more titles which we expect, hopefully, to be released this year. The first is on gender, the second is on mindfulness, and the third is on emotion. And we've already started planning the next 6 topics in the series. So do continue to watch this space as they emerge over the next 12 months. All of these books, I believe, are breaking new ground, and I do hope that they're also introducing new readers to this field of scholarship. We've got 3 main objectives with the book series. The first one is to explore aspects of Stanislavsky's work and legacy, but in the context of issues of contemporary importance. Now, that's not to say that we're avoiding the historical context. We absolutely are not doing that. But what we really wanted to do was focus mainly on contemporary practice and trying to look into the future rather than look back into the past. Secondly, the series aims at encouraging new voices to enter into the debate. So we wanted to encourage new writers, and maybe those who might not even have considered publishing in this sort of area before. Now, of course, we're not discouraging established scholars, far from it. If you look at the books we've already published, we have many distinguished colleagues who are already contributing material. But what we wanted to do was to promote a mix of voices and to try and get a mix of perspectives. And in doing so, also to promote new scholarship and try to encourage some new approaches. And finally, we wanted to create books that are accessible to the widest possible readership, which is quite a difficult task in itself. But the idea is that the material can be equally useful to a student who's preparing a paper for school, a PhD researcher, a teacher, or a practitioner, or someone who has a general interest in performance. There is one additional objective that I should mention, and that is that we want to link the books always very clearly with practice. And for that reason, you'll find contributions from many practitioners who wouldn't necessarily characterize themselves as traditional scholars in a conventional sense. And you'll also find that a lot of the books include exercises, practical work, different approaches that we hope will be very useful in a studio, in a rehearsal room, or in a teaching space in a school or college or university. Each of the books starts with a live event, a webinar, a symposium, or something similar, and that stimulates new thinking and it helps to introduce and to identify new ideas. So what I hope is that Stanislavsky And will prove to be a really adventurous, a provocative, and a groundbreaking series of books, and I would like to thank you all for being part of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate that. And yes, I'm very excited about this series and about Stanislavsky and intimacy, to hold it up one more time. We tried very hard to make it readable for people who don't know very much about Stanislavsky, but want to know more about the intimacy and consent work. And also for those who know a lot about Stanislavsky, but don't know maybe as much about the intimacy and consent work, and see how we can marry those two things together. So the whole book series really started when, not the series, sorry. This particular book started from the webinar, as Paul mentioned, when COVID happened and we were changing around what our focus was for things. I'm just going to change my view here real quick. When we were changing around things, for that, and the symposium was canceled, we were thinking about what are some of the things we could do for intimacy. And I had been working for some time with theatrical intimacy education. And I had also taken a few classes with one of the other leading intimacy groups as well, IDI at that time. And I had found that when I was doing this work, that not only did it make the actors feel more comfortable in the space, make them feel safer in the space, it made the intimacy itself be more interesting, but also that as a director, I loved it because it created ensemble very quickly, and that it made the entire process just so much better and so much deeper in a really much quicker time than I was used to. And to me, I was like, oh, okay, so this has so many benefits to it. But then when I was talking to director friends, sometimes they would say, I don't really want somebody coming in and taking away my work, right? Taking away, this is something I want to do. This is, I'm not unsafe. I'm a nice person, right? There's certainly nothing wrong with my safety in my group, and I care for all of my actors. I don't want somebody coming in and doing that. And so I was hearing that pushback and trying to figure out how we can get some more information out there about what is the work of intimacy practitioners and professionals in different areas, and also how it can work with Stanislavsky kind of truthful type acting in different formats and different styles, of course, but it has that truthful basis to it, and still using all of these protocols and professionals in it. And so that's really where the book came from. We had the webinar, which went really well, the first webinar. And some of those practitioners who talked on that and some of the scholars came together. And so luckily when we were talking, Paul was talking to me about the series, he said it can have lots of formats. It doesn't have to all be scholarly type articles, as he was mentioning. So I invited practitioners to work on the book as well and to give me their thoughts. So some of the folks who have contributed have really never written anything for publication before, and this was their first time. But they had a lot to say, and they had a lot of really, really wonderful training, but also just experience, and very passionate about the work. And other people were coming from a scholarly point of view or an educational point of view and saying, how can we do this to help our students? How can we do this to help the next generation of actors and directors in theater and in film, which is very important. So the book has a lot of people who do just theater, a lot of people who do just film, and some people who do all of the above in it. And so you'll be able to hear from all of them. So it was a really fascinating project for me. I loved working on this with all of the people in it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the introduction to start with, and then we'll have each of the authors talk about their chapters. So the introduction is really geared to both readers who may be an expert in one of the areas and not in the other. It was very clear to many of us that Stanislavsky did not mean for the system to become dogmatic. He really felt it should change as the needs of society and the productions changed. And so I felt it was really a perfect fit for, as our society has been changing, for intimacy and consent protocols, as well as protocols to help different people who are just different than them, right? Other marginalized communities in general. There's so much of that as well. And so the book also addresses that importantly. It's not an attempt to demythologize all of the system or anything like that, but kind of demythologize that idea that the system can't work with intimacy protocols. So this is a brand new field, and consent and intimacy requires new terms, new definitions. The field has not settled on many of these terms and definitions, so I did suggest some that I felt were coming to the forefront, and I tried to give a broad overview of what a lot of different terms are. First of all, intimacy is not just physical intimacy, so we talk about emotional intimacy, sexual intimacy, and what I call personal intimacy, which is kind of the vulnerability the system encourages in actors. The terms of intimacy choreographer and intimacy director are often interchangeable, but I talked about how that is and why that happened, what an intimacy coordinator is and how that's different, because intimacy coordinators are in film world. That one is a little bit more solidified, I would say, but other intimacy professionals and people are using intimacy practitioners and other terms like that. The introduction also offers a brief history of the new field, since many people don't really know where this came from. It seemed to pop up automatically after the Harvey Weinstein incident, but it was happening well before then. That was just what brought it to maybe the forefront in some people's minds. But it stems from unnamed, often women of color and other marginalized communities of care, all the way through the formalized, now international training programs. Most of our authors are working in the Western world right now, so either in the United States, in Great Britain, Finland, in particular, one's from Australia as well. But that's really where the forefront of this movement of intimacy practitioners has started, but it is stemmed now, so it's all over the world. There's people doing the work in North Korea, all through South America, Africa, and all just various places around the world. Australia has quite an active program as well. So we talk a little bit about that, especially the early organizations and how those came about. Talk about the consensus of what basic consent means and intimacy protocols are. So what are some of those protocols? What are we talking about when we go through this? And then there's a brief discussion of de-rolling, or sometimes people call it coming back to the self after intimate work, which is a way of self-care for actors to have a long and prosperous career and not take home some of those either negative emotions that the character might have suffered and have to use things that aren't so healthy to deal with that, or even some of the positive emotions that can get confused on how do you feel about the other actor versus the character. Then the introduction ends with an overview of the book. So at this point, I'd like to start with chapter 1 and continue in the order of the book chapters. So like I said, a few of the authors can't be here, so I'll jump in and say a few words for their chapters. But authors, I'll ask you each to announce your name, and if you forget the order, no worries, I will jump in with you as well, but your primary affiliation and your chapter title, if you remember it when you begin. Otherwise, I'll jump in, no problem at all. And once a person finishes, you can just jump in, but once again, I'll prompt you if you need it. First of all, up we have Laura Reichert, her chapter is Consent and Impulse to Action within Intimacy Choreography. One reason Laura is first is because she is one of the definite world leaders and founders of much of the work that we all do. And so I thought it was important to have her chapter start the book. So Laura, if you jump in, I'd love it.
You're muted.
Thank you. Hi, Joelle. Thank you so much for having me as part of the book and having me here today. I'm Laura Reichard. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am co-founder and head faculty of theatrical intimacy education, and I'm associate professor of theater at the University of South Carolina Upstate. And I've been teaching acting for over 20 years. All my foundational practices are Stanislavsky based or rooted in Stanislavsky based in some way. And I have been the intimacy work began for me in 2008 when I actually invented de-rolling that the intimacy discipline has glommed onto. And I started that as an acting teacher when I noticed students carrying the pain of the character out the door with them. And I was like, no, you can poeticize really painful moments and live a happy life. Let's go back and figure out how we can do that. And that's hence how de-rolling began, which led later into helping when we got to physical intimacy. I think part of my passion right now as an intimacy person and that this chapter helps contribute to is clarifying what is the scope of working with an intimacy coordinator or intimacy choreographer, intimacy director. I'm just going to say IC to blanket all those terms. Because right now that people have been doing it for a while, we're discovering that we need some clarification because some folks are having great experiences and some folks are not. And I also love that we are in this moment of sort of demystifying the misinterpretation of method as it goes back to Stanislavsky. And I think we can really thank Isaac Butler for his wonderful book that has done that. So yeah, chapter 1 it's meant to give folks an opportunity to see that there is no mandated right way to do intimacy work. It is dependent upon every person's experience that you are working with. And so even though my company, TIE, teaches consent-based tools and ways to set boundaries and a desexualized language for choreographing the intimacy, that doesn't mean that I'm going to always use those tools specifically as I invented them with Chelsea Pace, because the way I work might not work for the way the actors work. An actor's process is so integral to choreographing intimacy in a way that it's not in fight and dance. Because in fight and dance, particularly in dance, we get a dance call. We know what the actors are capable of. So we can pre-choreograph and then go into the room and see how it works for the dancers, right? In fight, we're going to get some training time, even if it's just a little bit. But in intimacy, nobody's giving you time to train the actors for intimacy. Hence why TIE said we wanted tools that worked for the most vulnerable people in the room, because we knew we weren't going to be given a lot of time to apply this work. Not that we need it. It doesn't take long to look good at doing a hug. It takes a while to look good at swinging metal at each other. So I wanted to sort of demystify that. I wanted to make it clear it's not hard. You just need some skills to do it, right? And you need some common sense and you need some empathy and sensitivity. And you need to understand actors' process and engage in actors' process. And so I talk in the chapter about how sometimes when I'm working with actors who are newer in the field, they want a more prescriptive process with intimacy often. They want to do all the tools exactly as I have created them. They're excited to go through all the steps with me. And then sometimes when I work with more seasoned actors, they want to work a different way. They might say, can we just find it? And I'll say, we're going to set our boundaries. And I'm going to let you, and you know that you can step out of this at any time. You know you can readjust boundaries at any time. But sure, let's see what happens in these first 3 beats. And then I'm going to say, hold. I'm going to state back to you physically what you found and check in if that's all working. So that way, that's a whole nother organic way of working as well. So if we do not talk to actors about their thoughts on the intimacy, about how they think their character wants to work or where their character, it doesn't mean they immediately act upon it. But when I choreograph, I do say, where do you think your character how do you think they want to respond in this moment physically? And then give that a desexualized movement vocabulary that can be done. So actor process is integral. It's so integral. And how actors work is integral. And also remembering, and this is particularly true in film, a lot of established actors have been their own intimacy coordinators and choreographers for years. They have valuable knowledge, and that can be really helpful. And sometimes that's been seen as resistance or folks not interested in an IC's process. But I have seen it the other way. It's them saying, I've been doing this a long time too, and I got some valuable information. And engaging in that conversation, I find, is really helpful. A lot of directors too. And this is why from the beginning with theatrical intimacy education, our goal hasn't been to just train ICs, but it's been to train everybody in the room at being better at being in the room. Because there's no point in asking open-ended questions just on the day when the intimacy coordinator is there. Ask open-ended questions all the time, and your whole process is more consent-based.
Thank you so much, Laura. That's a wonderful overview for us, how it started and all of the wonderful, amazing work that you've done over the years. So thank you for that. And so many of the practitioners reiterate that in different ways, like you said, throughout the book. I think that's one of the important points there, is to listen, and to that collaboration has to be part of it. That has to be the key of all of that. And what's going to work for one person is ask people in the field to listen to what is happening in the room and to really, really pay attention to the actors and the other people in the room, what they need from those moments. So thank you. Next up is the second chapter is actually one I wrote. I put this one second because it deals with some of the neurobiology behind why does this work? So that was some of my questions. I tend to like cognitive science, and that's part of my field of study always. And a lot of my scholarly research has revolved around that. And when I was doing my dissertation, I kept finding these things that were reflective very much of what I was doing with the intimacy and consent protocols in my professional life at the same time. And so that has married very well for me. And I found it very exciting to know what's happening, because sometimes as actors and students, for those of us who are educators, knowing why something is happening to our body can take away some of that pressure that something's wrong with me, right? So sometimes, especially in training, I find these to be really helpful. But I also think that directors and anybody in any kind of situation where we're leaders and bringing other people into the field with us, that we should have some idea of what's happening with us. So this is about what happens, kind of some typical responses. There's many, obviously, variations on this, but what happens to us when we encounter intimate scenes? And so I argue that not only these intimacy protocols help protect actors from experiencing new traumas in the room, which has been a thing sometimes that has happened, but also allow for that more immediate and focused and less kind of stress-blocked performances where the stress just gets in the way of everything. So to unpack that just a little bit, I just the chapter outlines some of the reasons why the protocols are needed. So starting with the obvious transgressions of the powerful and other external forces, but then focusing mostly on how the actor's body responds when this work is needed. Human memory and emotion processes are at play all the time. So how do those come into the fold as we're doing this work? What about the memory? What about the emotions, and those which are completely intertwined and you can't take those apart from each other? How acting in intimate moments draws on those two processes. Also considering the physical implications of anxiety and fear. So many of our students understand that they have anxiety now, that they're understanding and naming what that is. So how do they deal with that? How is it something that, okay, so you have this, how can we move forward with that? What does that feel like? How can we lessen that anxiety for people? How those things, anxiety and fear, can just shut the body down, so that not only can it negatively affect a performance, but it can be so severe that true consent is really impossible. So what can we do to prevent that from happening? The chapter moves on to how physical touch, including kissing, enters the process, and why kissing needs extra consideration besides not just catching a disease, right? There's a lot to it, and so we try to get through some of what that is. The chapter ends then with a discussion of the way character and self often intertwine for actors, much of what Laura was talking about and some of the practices that she invented and some others that have added on since then, how de-rolling techniques can help actors' mental hygiene, to borrow a Stanislavskian phrase, and all the way through really trying to marry that with how the understandings of Stanislavsky's system and specific writings to see with how do these things complement each other? How do they work together? What is something, if I had to ask Stanislavsky about it, maybe what would he say about some of these things? How would he work in these? And I'm convinced he would work all of these in because of his writings. The chapter ends with some implications and responsibilities for all of us who are reading this and who are leading other people in any way. If we're working with an actor in any way or a student, what are some of the responsibilities we have that come with this knowledge? So next up, though, that's it for that chapter. Our third chapter is Chrissy Poulter, who is somebody who's been working in the field of consent and intimacy, one of those unnamed people for many years, I would say, who's been working in this for many, many, many years, going back. And her chapter is Which Me Do You See? Emotional and Social Intimacy, Researched or Revealed. And I was very excited to be able to, and honored to be able to work with Chrissy on this. So Chrissy, I would love it if you would jump in now.
And I will jump in. And when Joel says that she was very honoured to work with me, literally Joel managed to drag this chapter out of me. And that's maybe one of the major things about it is I am so daunted by the notion of pinning something in time. Like even this now becomes the statement from today looked at in 10 years' time. So I am loath to say anything. But anyway, let me just get on with my chapter. My concern has always been guardianship in group work. Before anyone talked about intimacy coordination, and it didn't have to be about physical intimacy, it could be anything. It was the things that we went, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. So what I'm going to do first, just to keep myself in order, is read you the abstract, because then you'll know about the chapter, right? And then I'm going to just give you a couple of examples from it to just show the approach to it. So this is what the chapter is about. Stanislavsky taught that memory can trigger an emotion. In my work with theatre students, I make use of everyday distancing techniques, such as narration and improvisation, to help them step back from triggered emotion or memory in the work, things that are triggered in the work, to take a breather, just as a boxer must step back mid-fight, mid-punch, if the bell rings. End of the round, time out, sitting in their corner of the ring. Support team surrounds them, bringing water, towels, advice, built-in breathers. What are the built-in breathers for actors, for students? What are the punches? Who rings the bell? And where is their support team? My focus in this chapter is the transition from everyday public presentation of self to self-enroll in a theatre training context, and back again in the context of guardianship in group work. I named 3 phases of the process: person, participant, and player. And any of you have been, you won't have been, but just in my recent writing and thinking, those 3 things have been very useful to me, which is the move into deep play, the person that comes into the room that we transform into the participant ready to be in the work, that we move forward into being the player in role. And so, yes, we're doing all the work on emotions, but what happens? My field was improvisation. What happens when an actor, in the middle of an improvisation, something happens that is obviously going wrong? Do you step back out? Do you do that, de-rolling straight away? So in the chapter, I give a very personal example of a here and now event, an emotional memory, and I don't mean that in the Stanislavsky, something that upsets me. All right, a friend was killed in a car crash. That triggered, and I was thinking of it as I was going, why am I writing this chapter? My friend's died. And that triggered a memory of another friend who died back years and years and years ago, and the fact that I couldn't grieve that friend at the time, which triggered another memory of how I had used that memory in an acting exercise in a class with students where a colleague asked me to play Antigone. And I thought, oh, I better borrow a memory from somewhere to help me have a dead body that matters in this space. And I borrowed the memory of a friend who had died back then, 5 years before it was at the time, went in, improvised as Antigone, and wept. and I hadn't been able to eat, but it was a complete surprise. And my students went, "Oh my goodness," like teachers in tears. "Is this real? Is this?" And I literally weeping, going, "This is amazing," right? Said, "Keep going, deal with Antigone, I'm fine." And in a sense, that's what this chapter is about, the distinction we all work with, this awareness that the actor is still the actor alongside the work on the intimacy, which is what the intimacy coordinators do. So basically, the chapter goes through techniques that I have used within role where you don't get the actor out of role. You stay in role to deal with the in real that has been revealed, because to step out of role would actually mean them having to talk about something that has only just triggered them in the public that is the group. And so how do you, like Edmund in King Lear is one example, use the speech, "Thou make nature art my goddess." Use that to deal with what has just upset you, Edmund. I then go on to things that we can do in terms of how we set the class up, in that, so it stops being a public. You in your introduction, Joel, you actually talk about Stanislavsky being concerned and saying, "None of my work is meant to be done in public, not this sort of work, but our classes are public." They're already in public by being in that class. And then I go on from the strategies that we can use back into, even before I meet them, what can I do to be aware of some of the things that will help me deal with what's coming up. So that's what I mean by how do we deal with the things that are revealed when we're more used to dealing with the things that are researched. Just to show you, some of you know these books already, and this is my key example. This little book, a recipe book of games that I used forever back in the 80s, and never thought how those games could be misused. Imagine this person, you're giving them a birthday present. What would you give them? And we don't like that person, so we give them awful, horrible things. And I'm going, I never thought how the game could be misused, because in the close-knit world of our theatre people, it never is. Out in the world of where books live, anybody could use it. So I rewrote it. And every game now has an alert on it saying, is your group at the right level of ensemble or mutual respect to even go near this game? And hopefully there's a bit of guardianship built into it. So I'm not an intimacy coordinator. I'm not dealing with that sort of stuff, but I am dealing, and Stefan in his introduction to this whole series, the first book in the webinar, talked about the 21st century student, Generation X student, and said their identities, this is Stefan, their identities are becoming increasingly fluid and diverse. And the result is inclusivity becomes an essential consideration to 21st century pedagogies. This inclusivity ultimately remains highly Stanislavskian at its core. And I suppose really, let's just end on that, back to where Stefan began. That's what my chapter's about.
Thank you so much, Chrissy. Appreciate that so much. You always talk so beautifully. Up next, the next chapter is Emily Raleigh. She is teaching right now and will be joining us for the question and answer period. But she actually sent me a video, but I want to just say her chapter is called Relaxed Readiness, Increased Awareness, and Intimacy Protocols, Increasing Actors' Agency and Authenticity in Stanislavsky's System. And I'm going to go ahead and try to play that video right now. So just give me one moment. Video. And please let me know if you can hear it.
We cannot hear it, Joelle.
Thank you. Let me see. This is a little different than what I'm used to, so let's see here. That's not what I need. Need it to the share. All right, I'm going to work on that for a moment, but let me go ahead and jump in next, and we'll come back to that, and maybe, hopefully, Emily will actually be able to join us in the middle. But up next is Dee Granke's The 5 Pillars of Intimacy in the System, a springboard for truth and creativity. And Dee has some exciting things to share as well. So please jump in, Dee, and take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dee. My pronoun string is they, them. And I teach at the University of Maine now. I'm an assistant professor here, and I'm the primary teacher of acting and one of the directors in the production season. I also work professionally as an intimacy director, fight director, and director. I was one of the first folks to get certified by IDI back when that was a thing. And I'm a certified fight director with the Society of American Fight Directors. I've been teaching acting for a while now, and when I got into teaching acting, I was based in a lot of what we might consider physical-based or non-realistic-based work. But at my last institution, the University of South Florida, we had a capstone class that was contemporary theory. Of course, this was a wildly inadequate capstone, as most of our students were not going on to become scholars. And the professor of the course, Pat Finelli, asked me to come in and say, hey, let's try to make this relevant to practitioners. So I would come in and do workshops on each of the theorists as they would come up in class. And it was really fun for me because I got to discover that everything I knew about Stanislavsky was kind of wrong. In short, I blame the American educational acting system. When I applied for jobs, there's all these jobs that say, right, oh, we're looking for somebody who's a Stanislavsky expert, a Stanislavsky expert. And I would think that a lot of people who teach Stanislavsky in American higher education would be quite surprised to read his work and discover how much of it is not in any way, shape, or form what they're teaching. Because I think there's just there's a misunderstanding. There's this beautiful, tremendous amount of work that's been done that's post-Stanislavsky and that's rooted in Stanislavsky's work, pays homage to Stanislavsky's work, but is simply not Stanislavsky's work, or has gone so far from it that I would challenge that it is in some ways betrayed the principles, at least as they were written, recognizing that there is a practicing lineage of Stanislavsky and practitioners who may have evolved things, or again, there were things that Stanislavsky did in his life that maybe weren't written down, but simply reading the Benedetti translations opened up my eyes. And so when I started doing this, attacking this, one of the things that I think is a profound misunderstanding, again, at least in America, in particular in the American higher education system for acting, is this idea that it is all so deeply rooted in a verisimilitude that leaves no room for creativity or imagination. And so I started just looking at the idea of imagination in Stanislavsky and the idea of imagination and the importance of that separation in intimacy work, and thinking about how they're the same. And then as I continue to do the work on the essay, and Joelle helped me a lot with this, is just developing that idea that ultimately the pillars of intimacy that IDI described and used fundamentally are key components of the Stanislavsky system. Right. One of the pillars that IDI talked about was context being a key element of any intimacy work. Again, regardless of what intimacy work you do, regardless of what approach you take, what technique you take, as Laura kind of pointed out, how it changes in the rehearsal room, one of the most important things is always context. And to Laura's point earlier, that idea of context also just involves these people in the room. And if you actually read An Actor Prepares, or the first part of an actor's work, depending on how you want to talk about it, Stanislavsky literally says that. He literally says, given circumstances doesn't just include the character stuff, it includes everything. And I found that just fascinating. And then I started thinking about it. Again, I owe a lot to Tonya Sina, who's one of the founders of IDI, who's really my mentor and teacher. And Tonya went to the same graduate program that I did about 10 years apart. She went earlier than me, even though we're about the same age. And I know that program. I know what was taught there. And a lot of the stuff that was taught there was really about hammering home, making sure that we understood the ideas of Stanislavsky and how those apply to the actor training process. And I think in a way, a lot of those pillars were developed, that at least IDI's approach, I cannot speak to anything else, was developed fundamentally out of the Stanislavsky system. And so the essay does a lot of work just comparing and contrasting a couple of the pillars and some of the text from an actor's work, and how those pillars really line up pretty neatly with some of the big concepts in Stanislavsky, as well as expressing some of my very personal opinions about what I call generalized American academic acting. And that idea that, again, we conflate a lot of things. People say that I'm teaching Stanislavsky, and everything they're teaching is stuff that's post-Stanislavskian fundamentally. Again, the verbing or the actions or tactics, depending on what words you've heard or used for those, and again, assigning a gerund to a line of text, that comes so much later than Stanislavsky. That's 1970s in England. And that was something that was taught to me as fundamental to the system. And so I just think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. And I think that it would be interesting to, again, not that I'm a textualist, but to be a little textualist with people when they say, oh, well, Stanislavsky, and this is Stanislavsky. And it's like, really? Because here he says, and that's kind of a lot of the approach that was taken in the essay.
Wonderful, thank you. And I love that idea of that generalized American acting. I've told you that before. I was like, yes, we need to kind of talk about that more, right? What that means, what that's looked like over the years. All right, I'm going to try real quick again, one more time to share her screen and make sure when I do this, I click on all the boxes. And I think maybe I have it this time.
Hello, everyone. I am so sorry that I'm not here initially to greet you and be in the virtual space with you as I'm teaching, but in conversation with Joelle, decided that I would offer a short video to give you a sense of what my chapter is and how it adds to this fabulous conversation of my colleagues in this particular volume. My name is Emily Raleigh. I teach at Central Washington University in the US. My pronouns are she, her, and I work as an artist, as a director, and intimacy choreographer and educator, which deeply inform all of the ways that I come to this project and this particular essay. This particular essay is also based on a sort of case study. Each fall, I teach our Acting 1 class, which is a course that combines the study of Stanislavsky with an introduction to techniques for articulating consent and boundaries vis-a-vis intimacy choreography protocols. The class functions as an initial entry point to the students' collegiate acting training, and it's intentionally designed to provide initial study in and exposure to a variety of acting techniques, from Boal's Theater of the Oppressed, viewpoints originated by Mary Overly and adapted by Anne Bogart and Tina Landau, Black acting methods as outlined by Sherelle Luckett and Tia Schaefer and others, and more. At this introductory level, the curriculum also focuses on the foundations of Stanislavsky's system, because it's then built upon in subsequent classes and in other conversation with other acting techniques in our program. So we do a lot of study into Stanislavsky's system. Not too long ago, on the very first days of class, I taught the students the intimacy protocols and consent-based tools that they would see throughout the class, throughout their overall study across classes, and as we've begun to implement them across our entire department and degree programs. This includes the self-care cue, different types of boundaries, reminders that not everyone's boundaries are necessarily the same. And recently, as part of that class and that discussion, a student, a non-traditional student who came to the acting program to supplement their work in psychology, commented on and initially questioned our need to specifically articulate consent and boundaries as it related to our work as actors. In an early journal entry, the student pushed back against the incorporation of these intimacy protocols, questioning if the tools detracted from the authenticity of performance and worrying that they might impede an actor's personal freedom or connection with the character and performance. What was interesting is that by the end of the class, that student approached me and said, "Oh, I get it. I see how our intimacy work actually let me be in the moment more fully. I could be authentic and focused because I had technique. I knew the physical actions of touch were, and I knew where they were, so it didn't cloud my performance with emotion or stress. I see what we're doing." And that particular interaction inspired me and prompted me to think more deeply and formed the foundation of this essay to consider the ways that intimacy protocols and consent-based practices that infuse my class serve to actually reinforce the elements of Stanislavsky's system. It's not about avoiding discomfort. After all, the theatrical endeavor inherently depends on depicting characters in moments of conflict and discomfort. But it's giving actors tools to create authentic characters, as my fabulous colleague, who is also part of this volume, Laura Reichert, says, to poeticize the discomfort of the given circumstances. My essay looks particularly at two areas within Stanislavsky's technique and system that I particularly have found beneficial to consider in relation to consent-based approaches and intimacy protocols. And those two areas are relaxation and concentration. So the essay uses my acting course and this conversation with my student as a jumping off point and an introductory case study to examine the ways that infusing an acting class, particularly an early acting class, with intimacy and consent-based practices actually serves to reinforce Stanislavsky's system, specifically relaxation and concentration. And I argue in the chapter that these intimacy techniques, in conversation with the ways that Stanislavsky's system continued to develop throughout his iteration and beyond, actually offers actors a stronger, more sustainable approach to support themselves mentally and emotionally as they step into characters who inherently face challenges and discomfort within the action of the play. In the essay, I talk through specific tools and concepts I offer in my class. I tie some of the conversation around relaxation and concentration to my work also as a yoga instructor, and I offer observations about how employing these tools seem to have offered my students a stronger and more sustainable, more trauma-informed way to do the work of an actor and a stronger, clearer sense of technique with which they could then explore and create within Stanislavsky's system and technique. Specifically, I'm really interested in the ways that these intimacy protocols build trauma-informed practices that help all of our students in the room actually find a sense of release, find a sense of relaxation or relaxed readiness, which then can lead to more authentic performance and presence, as well as more readily enable their ability to concentrate. Thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate your support, and I'm so honored to be part of this volume.
Wonderful. I'm so glad that worked. Emily is always so wonderful to hear from. And hopefully she'll be able to join us for questions if any pop up for anyone in the meantime. The next chapter is written by Ann James, who is in rehearsal today before Tectonic Theater's new production, so she can't be here. But her chapter, Black Women and the Stanislavsky Method, calls on her experience as a staged intimacy professional, centering on racial sensitivity to interrogate if Stanislavsky's system is safe for Black actresses who are faced with racially charged or sensitive material. She extends her research by interviewing a variety of Black women about their experiences in both Stanislavsky-based training programs, which I will caveat are a lot like what Dee was talking about, have a wide basis of what Stanislavsky says and does, right? And professional practice to suggest an answer. So she interrogates some of what people have been trained and how that works, and whether or not that is something that, or I should say maybe how those can be adjusted so they can be safe for actresses of color and Black actresses in particular in that chapter. The next chapter, chapter 7, is Stanislavsky and stage sexual intimacy in film, an interview with intimacy coordinators Vanessa Coffey and David Thackeray. I had the pleasure of interviewing them for this. They are both work in film and television series all the time. In fact, they both were going to be here, and then their schedules got changed for being on set, and they both were on set. Vanessa is trying hard to get to a place where she can jump on for the question and answer period. But David won't be able to be with us all today for sure. But this chapter really talks about how Stanislavsky practices work together with the sexually staged intimacy protocols to create better spaces in the film production. They detail the processes, techniques, the philosophies that they use in all of their practices. There's a lot of details in the chapter because basically I was excited to hear a lot more about how this works. And so I had lots and lots of questions for them. So it ends up getting, they were so generous with their time and their talents and sharing the details all the way from pre-production, what's the very first things they do, from reading the script to then talking with the director, talking with the heads of productions areas, talking with all of the actors, and specifically, how do they adjust all of the things around there? How do they start to coordinate then? And then also on set, and what kinds of set? What does a closed set look like? What does one set look like versus another? How is it different working with child actors, which they have worked with, versus actors who've maybe been in the series for a long time, like Laura said, who they've got this, they've done this for a while. How do you go in and help that process so they feel comfortable but not having to give up everything they've already learned at the same time, versus somebody who's brand new to the field. And how are some of those changes in there? What is it like kind of in this field when there is some resistance, where there are some people who don't really want them there, but they think they have to have them there? How do you work with that? And so make sure that you're not stepping on toes, but you're helping the production and everybody on that production team, so to be able to come together in that vision. So it was really exciting to work with them, and like I said, they were quite generous with their time. And so I think it's in a format that they're both really lovely and easy to talk to. So hopefully you'll all be able to enjoy that chapter in there. Pia Rickman then wraps up our anthology with challenging professional practice, shifting pedagogies, and she is happily here. So I'm going to ask Pia to go ahead and jump in and tell us about your chapter.
Well, actually, that was the old name of the chapter. So the actual name of the chapter is it's Techniques for Action Within Actor Boundaries for Film and Theatre. And I will actually read the short introduction on the page, what I have written, and then try and give a summary. So first of all, so my name is Pia, and I'm a senior lecturer in acting and performance at University for the Creative Arts in Farnham in the United Kingdom, as well as I work as an intimacy coordinator and intimacy practitioner in film and TV mainly. I'm originally from Finland, and I work in both countries, in Finland and in the UK, but based here in England. So in my director training, early on in early 2000, I felt a disconnect in the communication between actors and directors. And this was further amplified when I entered the industry, where the roles were more clearly defined and the stakes were higher. The power imbalance that makes actors and directors and students and teachers fundamentally unequal can also make the creative collaboration conditional. Consent in training and in the industry was often not specifically considered until 2017. Traditionally, the desire had been for actors to be easy, adaptable, not slow things down, and be playful and almost childlike, therefore complying. It's often been a built-in assumption for the actors themselves too, and from there it's then quite easy for them to cross their boundaries and cross the boundaries of each other. This issue in power dynamics led me to unravel my experience in the industry and the common assumptions about contemporary actor training. I started researching into consent-based practices and boundary setting as part of the creative process. The Me Too movement and the subsequent raised awareness and urgency for consent-based performance practices also led to my training as an intimacy coordinator and changed the way I teach and exist in the world. This ongoing professional development has been more encompassing than I expected, and it's very much not just about sex scenes and nudity, as it's easy to assume, but it's more about the individual and their individual learning experience. As I assert in the equity/back to higher education, intimacy coordination and intimacy direction guidelines, it also links very strongly with protected characteristics identified within EDR policy and the Equality Act 2010. Understanding the link in an actor's process between creative risk, vulnerability, and the need for psychological safety is crucial for the significant and urgent trauma-informed developments that are needed to improve contemporary pedagogic practices in the training for the screen and stage industries. And then I go on briefly introducing the emerging field of intimacy coordination and intimacy directing, and how the work landed in Finland, and how I perceive the practice having come to the place where we are right now. I go through a typical choreography process for myself, and then I talk about intimacy and education. And overall, I think my chapter is mostly talking about the experience of how what are the challenges with intimacy work in education, and what are the challenges in the industry, and looking at those two and trying to bridge the gap for the for the student actor to go into the industry and feel supported, and feel that the industry is also changing as we are, as we're changing the practice in the education. And I then go on talking about considerations for the future, and one of those future details that have now emerged is the intimacy coordination and intimacy direction guidelines for higher education here in the UK that have been published late last year. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pia. Yeah, I thought I'd unmuted, but yeah, like Chrissy said, all the mistakes we make are recorded, but oh well. That's part of it, right? It's a changing field, but it's a changing, so should acting be, right? It's not dogmatic, it is not stuck for all time. Things change as we change as people, and as we industries change as well. So thank you, Pia, for giving us a call to action in the book, really for our schools and universities to be able to change, to help change the industry, right? So one reason I was always very drawn to theatrical intimacy education is because what they do is they want everybody to know these protocols, right? It needs to be something that, as Laura said, that we all are responsible for as we go in. Yes, hopefully there will always be people who are specifically engaged to deal with these intimacy coordinators and different and choreographers or intimacy directors on a set or on a stage to do that choreography, but also that everybody is doing those consent protocols on in our productions and in our classrooms. The book ends with just a very short kind of recap, not even a recap, I would say, but just a very few short thoughts at the ends of the major themes and an index in the book for ease of reference, hopefully, in there. And so that really wraps up what the book is about. You know, but it is one of the first books we thought more will be coming out about this, and how do you marry the acting with the intimacy protocols. I thank very much Stefan, Paul, and Jonathan for their support on all of this, and Paul in particular for being the series editor, inviting us to do this, and giving us a large kind of leeway on what the book was going to look like. So the chapters are set up a little bit differently, all of them, and there's a little bit of eclectic mix, which I find very, I like. So anyway, right now, though, we do have plenty of time for questions. So if you want to put your questions in the chat, feel free to do that, or in the question box. Either way, I think would be fine. And if the other folks pop on, then they'll be able to answer some. But in the meantime, you have all of these folks. So does anybody have any questions for us? I have both the question and answer box up and the chat. For panelists, do you have any questions or comments for each other? You're welcome to join in as well. Oh, we do have, Bella has actually put a comment in here, and so I'm going to read it from her. This whole book is brilliant. Thank you, Joelle, and all the contributors. Thank you, Bella. I just wanted to say, Chrissy, I love your concept of borrowing one of one's own memories and the constant checking the experience of the ensemble. Thank you. You were my first ever teacher when I was an undergraduate at Birmingham University. Oh, maybe that's why care, collaboration, and willing vulnerability have become part of my DNA as an actor, director, educator, and human being. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Chrissy. And all of the terrific contributors, as Paul said, this book is unique. Bella Merlin. Oh, thank you so much, Bella. That's wonderful, and I'm sure, Chrissy, if you want to say anything back, please feel free to jump in. But that's such a wonderful connection on how that resonates, right? How these things can resonate through our students.
What can you, I mean, there you go. There's an emotion revealed in the height of that just happened, everybody, here and now. Bella just said that. I mean, what would I say? I would say that thank you, Bella, from the depths of my heart, and how important it is not just to be working with actors, but to realize we're also working with the people who are going to be the teachers and the directors and everybody else. And therefore, they are the guardians in the world. So, hooray, shush, Chrissy. Bella, I've turned into someone who can't stop talking. I have an adrenaline brain problem. Bye.
Not at all. Thank you, Chrissy. That's really lovely. So Paul mentioned to just to kind of as people are thinking of maybe some other questions or comments, if you have any ideas, don't forget to discuss a potential title for the book series, and please contact Paul at paul@paulfryer.me.uk in there.
Joelle?
Yes.
Can I ask a general question to
Of
our authors? That we have them here now, and indeed, it's a kind of point that I should have made in my own little introduction, but I didn't. It comes back to this whole point about fluidity of approaches and different ways that we can express this. When the book series was first devised, what I wanted to do actually was a series of ebooks. Well, actually, I wanted interactive online publication so that people could, well, interact, strangely enough. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a publisher who was prepared to do that. So we had to make certain concessions about that. However, one thing that I did want to try and establish with all of the editors and all of the contributors was our willingness to try as far as we can to look at different ways of formatting and presenting people's work. So, I mean, they're the obvious things that we can do, things like we can publish interviews, we can publish an essay, and then someone else can write a response, and several of our editors are doing that. And that's quite interesting. I'd be really interested to hear if anyone here with us this evening has any thoughts about their ideas being limited by the notion of this becoming, your standard printed on paper or indeed ebook. These are available as an ebook, so you can get them online. But they weren't quite as adaptive and flexible as I would really have liked them to have been. I just wondered whether anyone had come across any thoughts, either working on this or something else, about the limitations of conventional publication and anything that we could try to do to make that work more accessible and more flexible.
Laura, go ahead and jump in, please.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And that's something I'm now talking more and more about in my work. And my internet's a bit spotty, so if I break up, let me know. Yeah, because even though the intimacy work seems like it's in its infancy, it just is in regards to it being recognized by the industry. And intimacy is everything that we do, because the biological nature of more than one person coming into a room with someone else to create something that is alive, that's intimacy. And that's what we do in film and television and theater. We create a living art form with other people. So from the moment we engage in this work, all of it's intimate. So having the practices that can be fluid, that can work with different people, and that we can talk about the different ways they work is really important. And now when I teach a workshop, I start it by saying, I am going to fill up your tool shed with lots and lots of tools. But remember, all because you have the tool doesn't mean you have to use it. If the lamp needs to be rewired, don't use the table saw just because you got a table saw. And what sort of happened with good intentions was folks learned all these different intimacy tools and walked into spaces and wanted to use all of them right away. But the very fact is they're not always needed. I mean, I can say that I've worked as an intimacy coordinator on some films where I really wasn't needed that day. But it was a case of better hire me and then not need me than need me and not have me, because everybody was working so well together in conversation around consent and boundaries and how the intimacy was going to look. In a way, I was just there to go, thumbs up, you're doing a great job. And so I think that that's what we have to remember about this work. And that's why I don't think there will ever be, this is the solidified practice of intimacy, because it is an artistic practice. And even within the fight world, where like maybe parry 1, parry 2, cut 3, cut 4 have a similarity no matter what fight organization you work with, the way the fight director choreographs still is in collaboration and a little different every single time. And with intimacy, it's like I like to say, like, yes, if we work with a ballet choreographer, position 1, 2, 3, and 4 are pretty much the same universally. But the way we decide a long, passionate kiss is going to look, that's never going to have that exact same choreographic language. Again, it goes back to the nature of intimacy, the psychological nature of intimacy. What I mean by that is intimacy lives in our pedestrian lives. Like when I'm finished with rehearsal or go home for work, I walk in the door and I hug my children. But if I'm in a show and I've learned a sword fight that night, I don't walk in the door and sword fight with my kids. Right? If I see a friend at the grocery store after a dance class, I typically don't pirouette up to them, but I might offer them a hug if I haven't seen them in a while. Intimacy lives in our everyday lives. We practice it every day. So we all have a little bit more of an ownership of it than we might necessarily feel like we do with fight and dance. And because the acting process is so intimate, and no matter what training we've gotten, every actor's technique is unique to them. Intimacy work will always, I feel, have a fluidity to it. And it's necessary that it does for it to remain a consent-based practice. Because if I force you to set boundaries in a way that I think should be the way to set boundaries, and it's been forced, that in itself goes against the very principle of consent-based practice.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Does anybody else want to comment on that question from Paul?
I can just
please do
add to. Yeah. I can just add to that. I think that probably that that answers to Paul in a way that that because intimacy practice is so because everyone has their own way into being an intimacy practitioner, that everyone comes from different background, everyone comes from different training, and then they have these specific training that they do need for intimacy, but that is then a fused practice that they put into that it might have it might be nerve-wracking for creative practitioners to put something into writing or put into any kind of format, like Chrissy said in the beginning of the session, because there's that fear that, oh my God, I have said something and now it's going to be looked back and criticized and crucified, and I'm going to be crucified and all of that. So, but I don't think that's to do with whether it's in written format, but it's in any kind of format where a creative practitioner says anything that can be looked back and said, hold on, you said that. No, yes, I did, but that was an hour ago. I changed my mind already because I saw it working differently. But what I also want to add to this conversation is that even though there are these individual creative ways that we work, there are also specific practices that are common and are universal and is becoming standardized in different regions, in different times, and in different ways. But they are important. It is important that there is this sort of accountability with the practices that can be looked back and can be referred to, and that the producers, for example, in the industry, have a clear idea what the work is, what does it include, what is necessary to be included, and what do we look at in the training of this person, for example, who comes in to do this work, in order for the work to be safer to within the environment where we're working with. And even though I would say that even though intimacy is something that we are all accustomed to because of our personal lives, and whoever we are, there's some form of intimacy as part of our human life in but all the time in every way, every day that we live, it's also in a way trying to find a word. It's misinformed in a way to be thinking that because we are human beings and intimacy is part of our lives, that it would be therefore okay to assume something. And that has been the problem earlier, that there's this assumed idea that actors are working with their bodies and actors are supposed to be happy-go-lucky people and easy and flexible. And that has also led to an assumption that actor's body is somehow property of the director, property of the other actor, property of the creative production, but it isn't. Intimacy is individual and everyone's body is their own, and therefore these tools that need to be taught for actors in education is building them a sense of agency over their choices and over their own body. And that's when the creativity can be unlocked for the student actor, but also going into the industry, that's where the work is then amplified in a way, and actors who have never had intimacy training and directors who've never learned about intimacy practices are finding it extremely emotional that it is now being talked about, and that it is that there's an opportunity to consider my boundaries, and that I am being heard in this space, and that I have agency over how I'm being touched and how I'm being seen, for example. And then going from there, obviously, to training the industry at the same time as we're training the education in educational settings.
May I, Joelle, just jump back in for a second,
Please.
because what Pia and what Laura have said there, fascinating, really interesting, just reminded me of what Chrissy said earlier on, which has to be a kind of watchword for me in the overall overview of the whole series, and that is that, once you put something into writing, you're kind of setting it in stone, and there it is, and 10 years later it's going to come back and haunt you. But in 2024, you said, yeah, I think we've probably all been there. But the issue that comes to my mind is that within this series, one of the things we have to avoid is any notion that we are providing a handbook. Yeah, read this book and you will know everything you need to know about intimacy, and therefore do all of these things and fine, tick, 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 you've done it. Now that could be applied so far to, and I was just checking down the list of the topics that we're doing and the topics that we have coming up, and many of those are verging on that really quite, I would use the word dangerous with consideration, the use, but dangerous edge of possibly being considered that we're giving people the toolbox and saying, yeah, here. I love Laura's comment about, you can say these are the tools, but you don't have to use all of them. And it is that thing about flexibility and giving people choice and giving them options, and that no one necessary thing that someone has written or has touched upon in the book is necessarily the right thing. It may be a right thing, but it may not be the right thing. And that's something I think we have to remember as the book series goes forward. And what we're talking about this evening is a great exemplar of that issue.
Thank you, Paul. And isn't that one reason why Stanislavsky didn't like to write things down, right? Because they were changing. And so this was his problem as well, right? So we're still wrestling with those same problems. Like how does that work? Laura, I'd love for you to go ahead and respond to that. And also, there was a question asked about trauma-informed language. And if you want to talk that'd be great, Laura.
Especially when I raised my hand. Yeah, but I will respond to Paul real quickly. Yeah, I mean, for me, ultimately, this work is doing a lot of what Stanislavsky was doing, and it's looking at modern science and what we know about the mind and the body and the way the vagus nervous system responds in this work, and having more progressive conversations, having the opportunity to have the conversations that weren't traditionally modeled in our spaces. But just to answer Bella's question about trauma-informed spaces, really sort of the quick answer is, trauma-informed means that I recognize that we are all human beings coming in with our own journeys, and some of those journeys might be quite activating. And so I have skills and sensitivity and empathy to recognize that and encourage folks or lead them to the support they need should they're activated in a way that needs some support. Trauma-based space means you are in a space led by a licensed mental health specialist, and that you have all agreed before you enter that space to talk about or put your trauma in the space for the goal of healing. And so most acting spaces are trauma-informed spaces. But this is why, particularly as an acting teacher, I talk about now in any exercise, especially if we're going to be pulling from the self, giving a lot of information for students to ask questions or have a different way of working, and making it clear, I am not a mental health specialist. And so I really want you to know the information so you don't pull from something that could be activating in a way in which you need the support of a mental health specialist. Of course, if you do, we're going to get you those services. So trauma-informed is I have mental health first aid and I will practice that and I need it. A really simple trauma-informed practice that anyone can do is asking people to state their pronouns if that's part of their practice, because that says to a marginalized community or community of trans folks who have not been supported, I am supportive of the community, and I want you to feel, I don't like the word safe, I want you to feel supported in this space, and I am a leader who will support you. That is one of the most simple, basic trauma-informed practices you can do. So that's the difference between all of Chrissy's work is trauma-informed work. And it's such an honor to hear about it today. And I want to uplift what Chrissy said about we change the industry by training the students who go into the industry. And I've seen that just from doing a 3-hour Zoom session with a university. I've had students write me years later and say, 3 years ago, you talked with my class and I was on set for something and I was able to use your tools to speak up for myself. So it's been a real honor to be in this space today. I'm gonna stop talking now. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. It doesn't always click on there. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Did anybody else want to have who hasn't had a chance to talk, address any of those or any other questions? I do know that, yes. Please.
I have a question, Jo, for the panel, Jonathan. I wanted to sort of think through the fascinating observations this evening through the lens of tradition and ask the question, is the Stanislavskian tradition particularly forward-thinking in respect of consent-based practices? Is this kind of cutting-edge performance practice and training practice? Are there other traditions which might be lagging behind? Polish, French, for instance, and I'm not making leaping to conclusions there. Or are we in a situation? I'm thinking of Bella's third version of Acting the Basics, where actor training, as it were, across the piece is being rethought and updated in terms of its understanding of intimacy. So I suppose the question for the panel would be, in your experience, are there areas which need to reflect the kind of forward thinking that we're seeing in this in this panel this evening, or do they feel we've made huge steps across the piece?
Anybody else want to jump in?
I think all of the above is happening. I have a book coming out this year called Consent in the Acting Classroom, and I spent a lot of time teaching acting teachers. And we're seeing the whole thing from people progressing traditional practices. There's a great book called Applied Meisner for the 21st Century Actor by Kim Shively and Kevin Otis. And they're speaking to this from the Meisner perspective. So right now, what I'm seeing from the plethora of acting teachers that I get to have contact with, it's everyone from wanting to progress and update the work, to take the foundations of the work that's so useful, but look at the society we're teaching now and progress it, and understand it's going to have to keep progressing. Folks looking at developing new tools. So I see across the gamut sort of everything that you just spoke to happening.
Yeah, and I would agree with that as well. And I'm a member of the VAST of the voice teachers, right? And they're doing the same thing in voice training, right? So bringing these tools in, but also tools of more inclusivity, right? So and which I think consent tools are very much part of that process. So I think among many different areas, and practitioners are looking at it as just kind of reiterating many ways what Laura is saying, but I'm certainly seeing that across the board and in lots of different fields that are kind of looking at it from different points of view and coming in and still bringing this work and trying to have, consent is the basis. A lot of us will say we have a consent-based classroom or consent-based space that we work within. And so that everything has that related to it. Stanislavsky, I think, lends itself really well to this. When we are looking at the Stanislavsky that is actor-centered and focused on what the actor needs and the actor as creative artists, I think very much lends itself and works so well with consent-based work, and particularly active analysis, which really allows so much of the actor to come through and the actor to have so much control over what they're doing in that. But yeah, I like Laura, the Meisner book is wonderful. And I think Chekhov, people who are studying Michael Chekhov are doing that as well. And so this work it's starting to pervade throughout. I can't really speak to other traditions and other areas. But in America, it seems to be that very much that way. And from what I understand in the UK, it seems to be coming around more too. Does anybody else have we're just about out of time, but does anybody else have any last minute thoughts that they'd like to add in?
I'll just add, I agree with what Joel you just said, but if I may, I will also highlight a book that I would recommend reading. This has nothing to do with me, but it's called "Be the Change: Learning and Teaching for the Creative Industries." It's edited by Anne McNamara, and this is a really. It's looking into exactly that what are the aspects of actor training that are changing, and what are we looking at through like accessibility, diversity, intimacy included.
Wonderful. Thank you for that offering. Appreciate that. Well, thank you all. We are available, and Vanessa said, please feel free to contact her if you have any questions. She wasn't able to get off set probably in time to be here, but she is also very willing to do that. So thank you all. Thank you for everybody for coming and sticking with us all the way through. We really appreciate that, and for some of your kind words, and everybody for your conversation, and for all the authors. Thank you for all of your hard work and your generosity in sharing your work on the page, as frightening and as exciting as that is, both at the same time, to be able to help others with this work and continue on. So Paul, thank you for your great support, Stefan and Jonathan as well for that. So I'll take care. Please feel free to continue that conversation if you'd like, and I hope to see all of you again soon. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.